And the next episode of To Serve Them All My Days is in a fortnight on Friday the 2nd of January. Now, on BBC One, here's Barry Took with another delivery of Points of View.
Good evening. Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat, but not so fat as our post bag, so let's plunge straight in. Margot Collier of Addleston, Surrey says,
I'm writing to ask if this coming Christmas we can look forward to real entertainment.
yes, but not necessarily on television. But seriously, it looks like a good TV Yuletide, which is as well for those on duty, our good friends the ambulance drivers and the firemen who have to sit and wait. We had a letter recently from Phil Edwards of Red Watch, the fire station crew. He writes,
Dear Mr. Took, thought you might like to know of the effect Mastermind has on the duty watch at our fire station.
yes, I would.
You see, we are turned out to fires by a similar warbler to that used by Mastermind.
Oh, you mean this? No, don't get up, chaps, it's only us. Anyway, Phil Edwards continues,
When Mastermind's warbler goes, for a split second there are 10 firemen at the edge of their seats ready to leap into action. I'm afraid, Mr. Took, Mastermind has a lot of wasted adrenaline to answer for.
just think what the competitors have to go through. You know, we always receive a fair crop of amusing, dotty or downright puzzling letters on Points of View. How about this from Hank Branca of Ulster?
It's a great surprise to me and my many friends that no mention has yet been given on your program on the subject of Monkey, the most incomprehensible balderdash ever to hit the screen. If this is an example of Japanese television, it's no wonder they're all so keen to get out to work.
Yes, it explains a lot. But now here's a letter from A.M. Yates of Weymouth.
Dear Uncle Barry, can you tell me, please, why it is that in Jaina of the Jungle and also Tarzan, all the topless gentlemen, including Tarzan himself, have A, no navels, and B, no nipples? Are these naughty parts that my mummy never told me about? Or is there perhaps something the matter with Mr. Hannah and Mr. Barbera? With lots of love from little Tony Yates, aged 65.
Tony Yates, you're as daft as a brush, but I like your style. And that of Denise Trelaw of Clacton-on-Sea, who writes,
I'm not a sports fan, but I always like to watch Michael Blakey reading the news, because every so often something awful crawls across the desk in front of him. It is always below camera level, which is just as well, judging by the look of apprehension on his face. You watch him, and you'll see.
I will. Sounds gripping. And so to our lead story of the week, that's to say the programme about which most of you have written. It was the play The Flip Side of Dominic Hyde, about a man who comes back from the future to the present day. Alan McIntosh of Portsmouth wrote at 11:20 p.m. on Tuesday, the 9th of December, to say,
Dear Points of View, 1 minute ago your play The Flip Side of Dominic Hyde finished. Up to now I thought that British television had nothing to offer. I can now say that it's only just started.
Jeanette Hiley of Seaford East Sussex wrote on the 10th.
Last night I had the great pleasure of watching the most amusing, fascinating, imaginative, but most of all touching play that I've ever seen on TV.
The Flip Side of Dominic Hyde, of course. Andrew Carcary of Ferryden by Montrose Tayside says that he
Became totally engrossed in what turned out to be a play of undeniably brilliant quality. In fact, I can add that it was the best television programme that I'd ever watched in my whole life.
and Mrs. Sylvia Hawkins of Wickford, Essex feels much the same way.
At last, a superbly funny, beautifully acted, brilliantly directed, and quite unique play.
Universal praise? Well, not quite. Marjorie Chanter of Dorchester says,
5 minutes of Flipside was enough for me, and off I went to bed.
well, Mrs. Chanter, it seems you missed a treat, as dozens of our correspondents affirm. Liz Critchley speaks for the majority when she says,
It was the most entertaining thing I have seen on the TV for ages, and wonder if you could show a little excerpt for any people who were not fortunate enough to see the play, and give those of us who did another glance.
certainly, another glance coming up.
Hey!
Midge, Felix, this is,
Hyde. Where? Excuse?
Hyde, of course, but what's your first name?
Gilby.
Gilby? Unusual. Whose round is it?
I'll get you a drink. Real ale.
Just the half. Thank you, Gilby.
A half real ale, please.
Half a pint, you mean?
No, real ale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, it's not a free house, you know.
Excuse?
Ah, excuse me, 25p.
Feel free.
Oi, 25p. Money, comprende?
Money. 25p.
That's right.
I have no please.
Oh, well, I'll guard this while you try and raise it.
the flip side of Dominic Hyde. But not only fantasy is commended by our viewers. Oppenheimer, the story of the man who developed the H-bomb, has come in for much praise. A.S. Hyland of Stretham's letter is typical.
I am writing to thank and congratulate the BBC for the marvellous series Oppenheimer. The cast was wonderful, and Sam Waterston played the part of Oppenheimer superbly. Why aren't there more programmes like this?
Oh, but there are. Keep watching. I have a hunch that 1981 will be a bumper year. But still in 1980, Fred Curry of Grantham has written to praise
Strangeways, superbly presented, riveting. Truth is stranger than fiction. More of this type, please. Different from some of the other tripe screens.
Yes, well, tripe is very much a matter of mood, and I, for one, enjoy the odd moment of tripe among the serious and the sincere. Indeed, many people regard, well, some people regard points of view, or me at any rate, as being tripe, as witness this petition we received earlier in the year from half the population of Norwich.
Dear Points of View, we all feel that Barry Took makes an abysmal job of presenter of this programme. We want Meglos as a new presenter, please, pronto.
And all kinds of people are alleged to have signed this petition, including Ian Trethowan, Margaret Thatcher, Barry Took, J.R., Arthur C. Clarke, Ayatollah Khomeini, David Boy Green and Edgar Allan Poe. But who the heck is Meglos? Well, that may have been the longest letter we've ever received. This must be the shortest. It comes from Stephen Childs of Harrogate.
Dear Barry Took, why?
And now two requests for the same thing. John Rees of Chipstead says of a recent news item,
I did enjoy the chimneys come tumbling down on the news this evening. Please, could you put them back up again?
And Elizabeth Kirk of Brighton asks for the same thing, adding in a postscript,
I really am old enough to know better, but it's fun.
well, it's nearly Christmas, so here come the falling chimneys in reverse. It's all done with mirrors. Our last letter comes from Jennifer M. Roberts of Maidstone in Kent, who says,
Dear Points of View, after watching your clip of the nationwide parrot, could I suggest that viewers have a chance to see their personal favourite funnies? The BBC has given us so many over the years, it would be nice to recall them.
Yes, it would. And we end with one of my favourite silly moments from 1980, the bouncing budgies of Arundel from It's a Knockout.
They're wobbling well. Out of the hat. Ah, they're really going at it. Paddling on. What's happening to the GB lad? 15 seconds to go. Too good. Yes. The other was almost there. 5 seconds. Yes. Hurry! Attention. You got me doing it now.
And so from all of us on Points of View, until next year, January the 9th to be precise, may I wish you a happy Christmas and a good new year. Goodbye.
On BBC Two shortly, Robert Robinson presents his favourite comic poems with the help of Instant Sunshine in the book programme. On BBC Wales in 25 minutes, there's international show jumping from Olympia. First, the 9 o'clock news with Jan Leeming.
The Republican prisoners in the maze are to start giving up their blanket and dirty cells protest. But after the end of the hunger strike, there's still vehement political argument about who won. American hopes for a quick release of the hostages in Iran have receded. There's still a multi-million-dollar snag. The former Soviet Union Prime Minister, Mr. Kosygin, has died after a heart attack. And the funeral of Jacqueline Hill, the Leeds University student believed to have been the latest victim of the Yorkshire Ripper. Good evening. There's hope tonight that the whole protest campaign by Republican prisoners in Northern Ireland will soon be over. The 7 hunger strikers at the Maze prison who decided to end their protest last night were joined by the other 30, and all have been taking food again today. And within hours, the 460 prisoners who've been wearing only blankets and fouling their cells said they'd also be giving up this so-called dirty protest within the next week. Provisional Sinn Féin, political wing of the IRA, said this would depend on the government honouring certain parts of their new document on prison conditions, chiefly on clothing and prison work. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Mr Humphrey Atkins, announcing the end of the hunger strike in the Commons, stressed that the government had made no concessions and that the Republican prisoners were accepting only what had always been on offer. But the Maze prisoners themselves claim they've now won political status in everything but name. From Belfast, Michael Sullivan reports.
Demanding the status of political prisoners, IRA men inside the Maze have lived in squalor for more than 4 years now, wearing only blankets rather than prison uniform, refusing to wash and smearing the walls of their cells with their own excrement. It didn't have the effect they wanted. Neither Labour nor Conservative governments were prepared to give them political status, and the hunger strike was started in an attempt to give the protest new momentum. Outside the prison, the 4-year-old campaign was maintained by the prisoners' supporters in the H Block Committee, but after 53 days, the imminent death of 2 of the strikers generated its own tension in Northern Ireland. The prison authorities may not have given in to the strikers, but they didn't ignore them. They published a long appraisal of the prison system, setting out what's available to prisoners in Northern Ireland and distributing it to the protesters. It's around that document that the argument about the outcome of the strike will centre. The provisionals claim it to be a victory.
I was in with Bobby Sands, the OC of the protesting political prisoners, and he was extremely buoyant this morning and very, very happy about the outcome.
Are the prisoners in fact reading it that the government have given them political status without actually saying this?
Well, by coming in and by delivering a document to Bobby Sands, who's the OC of the prisoners, and to Brenton Hughes, who was leading the hunger strikers, shows that there has been political recognition, although we don't expect the Brits to formally say this.
The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has insisted that the document could not possibly be construed as the granting of political status, that it was no more than the elaboration of information given to the protesters earlier this month. But not only do the strikers and their supporters claim that they won by wringing concessions from the government, but their most bitter opponents, Northern Ireland's loyalists, are ready to regard it as a government climb down in the face of demands by convicted terrorists. Ian Paisley and Enoch Powell gave a taste of that in their questions to Mr Humphrey Atkins in the House of Commons today. The ugly political hostilities will remain here, but they're hardly inflamed by an end to the hunger strike and the lingering squalor of the dirty and the blanket protests. Rather, the lessening of tension here has come at the best of times, in time for Christmas.
Well, for weeks, the Northern Ireland Secretary and his advisers knew that if they were to get the prisoners to end their hunger strike, they'd have to provide them with a ready-made excuse for doing so. That meant in practice putting out a series of statements, 3 in all, which went into differing amounts of detail about the central theme, what was actually available to the hunger strikers if they gave up. Yesterday, a Catholic priest armed with one of these documents went to visit the men. It was 30 pages long and spelled out the precise implications of what the British government had already announced it would allow. The prisoners' families could, for instance, send them civilian clothes, and they could wear them for half the time they spend outside their cells. They could have more visits and letters, and there was the prospect of regaining lost remission. In fact, this document genuinely wasn't anything new. It had been put before MPs at Westminster a fortnight earlier, but significantly it hadn't been shown to the prisoners themselves. The Catholic priest went through it with them, and the combination of this detailed list of assurances, the repeated refusal by Mrs. Thatcher to agree to the idea of political status, and Sean McKenna's closeness to death did the trick. At 7:46 yesterday evening, the men announced they were giving up. Quite clearly, the Northern Ireland Secretary isn't too worked up by the claims of the Provisional Sinn Féin to have won a moral victory. For him, the essential thing is that the hunger strike was called off. He was certain why that had been.
I think it can only have been because they eventually realized that the government meant what it said, what it's been saying all along, that there was no way in which their demand for political status was going to be granted. This is what they've demanded, what the whole protest, the blanket protest, the dirty protest, and now the hunger strike has been about. And we have said consistently that we wouldn't grant it. And I suppose they finally came to realize that we weren't going to, and they were faced with a choice of either dying within...
Boy likes girl. Girl likes Cherry B.